This is Secret Stories, and my name is Mary Kachapalya. Many people cannot be on camera because their employer, their family, their friends, or church and synagogue would roll their eyes, ridicule, misunderstand them, or even fire them. Secret Stories allow you to tell your story with anonymity. Here I read experiencers' accounts commented on YouTube and emailed to us at Breaking the Silence. In this episode, our experiencer felt strongly about keeping his anonymity, and of course, we're honoring his choice. Hello, I am an executive with a large tech company and cannot have any of this associated with me. It would end my career. I am contacting you through an anonymous email address that I monitor and am open to answering any questions you might have for me not related to my actual identity. I was born in 1976 and lived on the South Shore of Suffolk County, New York. My father worked in aerospace and put me in the habit of looking up from the time I was very young. Looking at passing air traffic, identifying the model aircraft, learning approach vectors for airports, aircraft signal lights, and understanding flight. My father was a true enthusiast and instilled a lot of that into me. I grew up in a very special place at a very specific time. I grew up in a hamlet where a significant portion of the residents worked in aerospace or worked in various, especially scientific, capacities at Brookhaven National Lab. Most of my friends had one or both parents employed there, some of whom held very significant positions. Many of them were active scientists, while others were former scientists promoted into leadership roles. My first sighting was sometime between 1980, when a younger sibling was old enough to stand, and the theatrical release of E.T. in June 1982. It was a time of year before oak trees in New York sprout leaves. I was in our family's den. My sibling was off to my left. I was looking out the sliding glass door after dark. The night sky was somewhat lighter than the inky darkness of our backyard. Our backyard shared a back fence with the backyards of the house on the next block over. They had a couple of oak trees in the back corner of their yard. I was looking up at the night sky through a sliding glass door for some reason when I saw a circular object about the size of a nickel if I had held it up to the sky in my hand. It was an off-white color and surrounded by a haze that moved as if it was gaseous or fluid-like a poorly drawn comet tail or poorly drawn white cartoony flame around the circle. The tail extended past the trailing edge of the object at a distance less than the diameter of the object, and it flew from the north to the south at a quicker pace, faster than passing aircraft on approach to ISP Airport. The object left my field of view to the south, blocked by the exterior edge of the house and trees. I was immediately very upset and began calling for my mother, who was on the other side of the house at the time. I was shouting about seeing something in the sky. I kept searching the sky when I saw the object fly back into my field of view from the south on an easterly trajectory. Only now the object looked more like a coin or disc held at an angle and was gaining altitude as it shot off into the distance and out of sight. A boy who was a year older than me insisted that he had seen it too, although I always doubted him to some degree. I've had no contact with him since before high school, and he passed away a few years ago. This memory has sat in my mind my entire life since then. I think about it several times a day, every day since it happened. I can still go to my parents' home and look out at the same yard. The oak trees had grown much taller since then, but I still often look out at the yard, thinking about it. I've attached an image file that you can use however you want to that illustrates as closely as I can manage what it initially looked like to me. I tried to illustrate the relative size of the object in the sky, its position above the treetops as they were at the time. I couldn't get the color of the sky right. The squiggles are meant to illustrate branches. I have basically no artistic talent. This was the first event I have memory of. At the time, I lived in a bedroom with a south-facing window in my parents' house. I lived in this bed until I was maybe in 5th grade. Sometime after this event, we saw E.T. at the drive-in. There were scenes in this film where the sky was the right color, where the depth of shadow was very similar to that night, and I remember thinking about that. But the ship in E.T. was very different. I was, and still am, fairly certain that what I saw was a disc or saucer-shaped object, that maybe I was seeing the underside of it initially, and was seeing it from more of an angle when I saw it speeding off to the east. To be clear, it absolutely was not the moon. After seeing this object, there were nights where I would feel absolute terror. Terror to the point where I was afraid to move in bed or even breathe, and I would eventually fall asleep or simply wake up to it being morning. I remember one day, a bright day, playing in that bedroom and something I was playing with lifting up into the air in front of me, floating over my head and into the hand of someone standing near the exterior bedroom wall. I did not feel fear then. I actually felt happy to see whoever it was. My memory of who it was is blank. It's a silhouette in my memory. Child-sized thin hands. I know I can remember if I wanted to, but that I'm not supposed to, so I don't. And that is a common theme. You're not supposed to remember. When I moved to a bedroom on the 2nd floor of my parents' home, which had an east-facing window, I went through frequent cycles of fear and curiosity. I'm not supposed to talk about this. They know when you talk about them. I have to laugh at myself sitting here typing this. This is ridiculous. Anyway, a bump appeared on my right knee at some time when I was in middle school. Our middle school was grades 6 through 8. I would often play with the bump, even though I was supposed to leave it alone. The bump was with me all through middle school as this cycle of fear, almost terror, some nights, and avoided thinking about them, continued. A bookstore in Smith Haven Mall in the 80s put a display of Whitley Strieber's Communion up near its entrance so that you couldn't miss it when you walked past, and I was afraid to look at it. The picture on the cover is wrong. That's not quite what they look like. I knew what I was looking at and did my best not to think about it. In high school, I experienced multiple episodes of missing time with a friend of mine. It always happened when we ventured down a specific dirt road at night in Brookhaven Hamlet. Sometimes it would be a period of 30 minutes, sometimes longer. We never felt anything in the way of fear heading down there, and never felt anything in the way of fear when we realized we were missing time. It happened frequently. We'd make excuses for it despite the strangeness of it all. Things seemed to stop, or at least slow down substantially during my senior year of high school. Then, when I came home after my first semester of college, I was sitting in that same bedroom one night before returning to school, and I decided that I had had enough. I dug a hard object out of the bump on my knee, tossed it into the trash can in my bedroom, and vowed not to return. I left the next day, returned to college, spent that summer on campus, then pursued a program the school offered where I would be overseas for my sophomore year. I would be on the other side of the planet. Everything stopped. I returned to my parents' home a year later, still in school, on internship and taking classes, commuting to campus. Nothing unusual happened. That was how things went through the rest of college, through my first years out in the workforce. Sometime around 2010, I began having a series of sightings. I was an avid nature photographer, hobbyist, and was always out with my camera and telescope. One night, on an evening commute after dark, I was eastbound on the Northern State Parkway in gridlock with the windows of my car rolled down. I was looking around, looking up, and saw what looked like a silhouette of a black triangle flying far overhead with no lights. It looked like a dark-colored triangle set against a dark, overcast sky that was a little lighter than the triangle. It was a little larger than a 50-cent piece if I had held one arm up at length. It just moved quickly and silently to the south near the exit of Route 110 in Huntington Township. Following this, I saw a series of lights from significant distance over the smokestacks of the Northport Power Plant on the north shore of Long Island. There was one above each smokestack, and they took turns bobbing toward the tip of the smokestack they hovered above, bobbing back up and disappearing. This lasted long enough for me to pull over and watch. Then finally one night, around 2011 or 2012, on my way home, at approximately 10:30 p.m., I was pulling into the parking lot of the apartment facility where I lived. I was looking to my left toward the east and saw a triangular formation of lights. I remember feeling really annoyed because I had been seeing so many unusual things in the sky around that time. I pulled into the parking lot, parked my car, grabbed my bag and my camera, and took a step toward my apartment building. This probably took less than 40 seconds. I stopped in my tracks. The triangular formation of lights was now above me. It was a large triangular object with a light in each corner. It was huge, football field sized or seemingly so. It was low, blocking out the lighter, overcast, light-polluted sky. It was darker than the night sky, which was starting to get cloudy as weather was moving in. I had my DSLR in my hands, but I had been using it to take long exposure photos of the sky earlier that night. I tried taking a photo, but all I got was blur. 4 young men, late teens, I would guess, came out of the building. One of them, who I knew lived with his mother, asked me if I had a cigarette. I just said, "Really?" and pointed up. All 4 of them looked up, began shouting excitedly, "Oh, shoot! What's that? Look at that!" Then it was like someone threw a switch. They immediately stopped, turned, and walked in single file line along the sidewalk, around the building, and out of sight. I stood there watching as the whitish amberish light in each of the 3 corners of this large triangle turned off, as if doors closed around them. The object began accelerating, speeding off to the north-northwest. I got back into my car and began chasing it, as if I was Richard Dreyfuss. I chased after it through the parking lot, into the parking lot of the adjoining apartment complex, past high-tension power lines, but by then it was so far off there was no hope of my getting any closer. I had nothing to show for it other than a blur on a photo. Nothing in the way of evidence. I told a couple of people about it, but that was that. It was also the last sighting I would have for a while. Not long after, I became very mobile for a few years. I changed jobs, moved, I started dating my wife, spending no more than a couple of nights in the same place in a row, which was, by design, just a byproduct of living a busy life. I got married, bought a house, changed jobs, and settled down. One night in 2018, we were walking our dogs after dark in a boring suburban western Suffolk County, Long Island, New York neighborhood. As we walked down the street, I happened to look up and saw something that looked like an LED light in the sky. Round, low, maybe 20 feet over the second-story rooftops of the houses in the neighborhood. I watched as it shot along from the north to the south and just turned off. The following summer, we were on our deck with a group of friends grilling, enjoying wine, and we, as a group, stopped what we were doing, watching something we thought was a drone to the east of where we were standing. We were thinking it was over a nearby schoolyard. It moved north a little, south a little, hovered. Most of our guests lost interest. It's just a drone. I continued watching with a friend of mine. It moved back and forth, hovering for a few seconds each time it moved. Then it shot up incredibly fast, disappearing out of sight above us. That object, whatever it was, got me watching the skies again for the first time in years. And I saw a number of drones in the area. Not many, but at least a half a dozen nights. Drones. I became comfortable thinking the schoolyard object was just a drone. The pandemic came and went. By this time, I was working from home full-time and had been for a while. I was at my desk working when I felt a presence. I'm not really sure how to describe this, but I know when they are around. It's like I can feel them. It's like there's a feeling as tangible as if I were holding a weight. It's like they're signaling an encounter. I can think, no, go away. And it might persist for a moment or two, long enough for me to think, no, go away. And it does. That feeling goes away. Sometimes I feel and I think, why can't you come at a reasonable hour and knock on the door like a normal person? Or call ahead of time on the phone? I know that sounds ridiculous. This happens somewhat regularly. They do something to you where it's like they can see and hear through you, or it's like they're present in your mind in a way that someone standing miles away from you, standing against the horizon, is still there, present, in a way as if observing over your shoulders with binoculars. At some point, they found me again. I don't know when that was exactly. I sometimes feel anxious, really anxious about it when I feel that presence. Other times I feel like I welcome it. I don't want to stop, while at the same time I want it to be less creepy. I feel like there's this hurdle I face initially, but once I'm allowed to remember, I welcome contact. I want to be involved. I want to be among them. But you're not supposed to remember, and the moments between feeling that presence and being allowed to remember are terrifying at times. I don't consciously remember anything that happens with them, what they look like, what happens, anything at all. I know that information is in there, in my mind, somewhere. I have flashes sometimes of part of a wall, for example, but most of it is hidden, and these flashes, which are really on par with an old mundane memory that might surface from time to time, doesn't feel significant in any way. It doesn't strike me as anything like a trauma. My wife knows very little of this. That is how private or secretive I am about it. I have a very good marriage and would sooner never say a word than jeopardize it with this. If she suspects anything beyond the sightings I've shared, she's never said anything. I think I know that they have been here for a very long time. I think contactee relationships are sometimes generational, and believe this to be the case with me. I think I also know that there are several different species of grays, that there are human gray hybrids who are far more human than gray, and that there are many other non-gray species who are here and have been for a long time. There are some that look somewhat mantis-like. There are tall whites who look like pale white-colored grays, and tall whites that look like humans. Because what I have related here, I can trace back to my grandmother, who in the early 1950s was in the backyard with her very young daughters hanging laundry on the line to dry. When she looked up, she saw a large gold saucer hovering over the water tower that used to stand south of the Montauk Highway in Pachogue, New York. She had said that I don't know who they were, but they weren't here from here, and she called them demonic. She was a devout, hardcore, strict Catholic and would fall silent when I would ask her how she knew they weren't from here. A few years later in Germany, a man who would later marry one of my mother's sisters was hunting in the forest with his uncle. They were up a tree in a blind and intended to spend the night as evening crept near. He saw a large gold saucer suddenly overhead with no memory of what happened next. Years before my parents met, my father was in the U.S. Air Force and seeing objects caught on military radar that defied flight characteristics of conventional aircraft, both in Maine and in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. My younger sister, who was so young that she was new to standing when I saw the object in the early 80s, continues to have vivid dreams of her bedroom wall in her home turning into a curtain of light and Grays stepping out of it into her bedroom, and dreams about becoming verbally violent toward Grays who were in her house interested in her children. And I believe they came from my mother through her life too. Anyway, that's my truth. I have no evidence, and I understand that makes this nothing more than hearsay. I wish I could tell you more. I want to know more. I want to know what's really happening. I want to know everyone's motivations. I want to know everything. But I also know that I'm not meant to. Not at this time, anyway. I don't know if that makes sense to you, as it doesn't really make any sense to me. Regards, John Doe. Thank you, John Doe, for sharing your testimony here. Secret stories are your accounts, and thank you for sharing them. It takes guts to share your account, and when you feel ready, I will share your story for you. This is Mary Cachapalya. May love and light be with you.